Thank you everyone for joining this forum meeting. It's been over a year since we officially met as an organization. Due to the pandemic, we had to shift, as many of us had, with our prospective organizations or offices with elected officials and how we will be working with our constituents. So we're happy that we are here today, reconnected. Usually we do this in person, but we still have the capability to see each other virtually. And I know it's not the best. We've been doing this virtually for several months, but it's good that we are once again reconvening in a new era. In 2017, the Centreville Immigration Forum established this cohort where we would like to gather information of county folks, nonprofits, religious leaders to discuss the current policies that was affecting the immigrant community. As we know, in 2017, up until this January, we had an administration that was harsh to our immigrant and undocumented communities. So the Centreville Immigration Forum convened these monthly meetings so we can share information to see what was going on. And as Trump was working very hard to ensure that several roadblocks would be affecting our community members. So once again, thank you for being here. Today we have three amazing panelists that will be discussing Biden's 100th day as president. So this format for this panel discussion, we will be breaking it into three sections. We'll be breaking it into the Trump era policies, what he did in his 4 years, and what the Biden administration has done or is currently doing to overturn these policies. In the second portion of our discussion, we will transition to the immigration reform legislation that's been going on, that's been introduced by Congress, Senate, and very important information that Biden has shared just in the past 2 weeks. And then our last portion of this segment is federal advocacy. What can you and I do to ensure that we can achieve immigration reform? So with us today, we have three amazing panelists. We have Meredith Ackerman, that is with For Our Future, and she started in Virginia politics and campaigns in 2013. She worked for the Democratic Party of Virginia in past election cycles and worked for Our Future since 2017. At For Our Future, she started as a field and digital organizer and moved up the ladder to digital organizing manager. She has been active in advocating and lobbying for the passage of Medicaid expansion, minimum wage increase with the Raise the Wage Coalition, and safe school reopenings this year. We are looking forward to having her here with us and for her to continue advocating for key progressive issues in the future. And I would also like to introduce our other amazing panelist, Monica Saramiento. She's the Executive Director for the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights. Ms. Monica Saramiento is a community organizer and currently serves as the Executive Director for the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights, one of the largest coalitions in the Commonwealth of Virginia. VASIR is a 501c3 organization dedicated to the defense of dignity, power, and quality of life for all immigrant and refugee communities. Ms. Sarmiento began her career with the Fairfax County Government Department of Social Self-Sufficiency, then made the decision to transition to political work after being confronted with unfair policies that hurt the most vulnerable in our community. Ms. Sarmiento fought for labor rights at the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers Labor Union, held a one-year fellowship at the U.S. House of Representatives Democratic Caucus, and vice chairman to the Honorable Xavier Becerra. She also worked as an organizer for the Obama-Biden 2012 campaign, the Terry McAuliffe 2013 governor campaign, and community liaison for the first Affordable Care Act rollout plan at Planned Parenthood Federation of America, before she joined VASIR in 2015. Ms. Sarmiento is a graduate of the University of the District of Columbia. District of Columbia, a Virginia local, and a Salvadorian American who immigrated to the United States with her family in 1987. Now I would like to introduce our other panelist, Hassan Ahmad. He is attorney at law with the HMA law firm. Hassan is an immigration lawyer and advocate who firmly believes that serving clients means not only direct representation, but also advocating for their interests before lawmakers and informing them of what his clients are actually going through. Using his language abilities, he relates his clients' stories to legislators, governors, and policymakers at the state and national level. This advocacy is one of the reasons he was appointed by Governor Terry McAuliffe to serve on the Virginia Asian Advisory Board, helping advise the governor on issues facing the AAPI community and beyond. And as well as the Commonwealth Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, it is why he also served on the board of the Dulles Justice Coalition, the group of airport lawyers who represented clients in the wake of President Trump's Muslim ban, and as a board member of the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights. Hassan took these ideas on the campaign trail in 2019, coming in second in the Commonwealth's most competitive four-way primary for the House of Delegates District 87. It is why he takes on anti-immigrant groups who see immigrants as un-American, and he is not afraid to expose their hateful rhetoric for what it is, challenging them in the media, on the Hill, and connecting with veteran advocates to amplify his efforts. Hassan currently serves as the first ever Virginia Office of the New Americans Advisory Board, helping formulate state-level policies to welcome future citizens. Hassan is a Pakistani American and raised in North Carolina, and he currently lives with his family in Loudoun County since 2006. So thank you to each one of you for taking the time to be here with us. And as I mentioned to everyone who just joined, if we do lose connection, please rejoin. We ask that each one of you put yourself on mute. And for those who are just joining in, we will be breaking this discussion into three sections. The Trump era policies, immigration reform legislation, and federal advocacy. So for the first question, this is to all panelists. Prior to President Biden taking office, President Trump established several policies that has damaging impact to the immigrant community. What has been impactful? What has been the impactful policy that President Biden has overturned since taking office in January? Each panelist will have 5 minutes to respond.
I can go first. And this isn't so much undoing a specific policy that the Trump administration had put into effect, but kind of correcting a lack of recognition that a lot of undocumented essential workers have faced throughout this pandemic. While they've kept our country moving, they're still living in fear of being deported and separated from their families. So last month, there was introduced the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act, which allows about 5.3 million workers to apply for an 8-year path to citizenship. And this is, I'll probably talk about this a little bit more later because labor is my main focus, but it offers 5.3 million immigrants the option to become a citizen who have kind of helped move our country through this pandemic. And just for a frame of reference, at 5.3 million is about 3 in 4 undocumented workers has been considered essential throughout this pandemic. So it's a large chunk of the population that will be eligible for this pathway to citizenship. So that would be my pitch for the best thing that's happened in his 100 days, his first 100 days.
So thank you, Meredith, for kicking us off. John, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. Thank you, everyone. I'm so excited to see all of you here at Centreville Immigration Forum. That has been an absolutely pivotal organization in the Commonwealth of Virginia that has worked in regards to immigrant rights and collaborated with VACIR and on the ground directly to see so many of this movement going forward, not just at the federal level, but also at the local and state level. So thank you all for having me here and all of the work that you do. But so President Biden has gone ahead and started, and as you know, he came into a lot of broken fractures, not just from the Trump administration, but also from the Obama administration. A lot of really broken policies that had been continued on from the Obama administration. And mind you, President Obama was in office for 8 years, but it really wasn't until the last 2 years of his term that he really started to try to go ahead and turn around a lot of the policies that were just not functioning and incredibly hurtful for the immigrant community. Unfortunately, by then, so much damage had been done and then continued on and exacerbated by the Trump administration. So when President Biden came in, he came in with the promise and ideal that there could be bipartisan work as well as being able to go ahead and staff up and see how those changes can be done. He did go ahead and on day one send down the Citizenship Act of 2021, which is starting to make its way through. But as we know, there's still that, divisiveness within Congress that we're seeing. But as of right now, what I'm most excited about from the Biden administration is the time he has taken to really look through the expertise of the people he's bringing on staff that we're still continuing to see bring on staff and the diversity that means. And not just for his cabinet positions, but also in Homeland Security, as well as USCIS and how that is going to go ahead and impact. So we're seeing a lot of names that we're familiar with before, but also coming in very different facets, like Felicia Escobar, who's now going to be the chief of staff at USCIS, and her expertise, and also bringing in a number of different folks who have worked with the administration in the past and are really looking forward to filling a lot of not just the higher level positions, but also the appointment positions that are really a lot of the backbone of the work that is happening. And of course, we know that sometimes that progress is slow. It was slower during the Obama administration that we're seeing now. But this and the fact of when those folks are being put in, they were some of our strongest allies during the Trump administration and the attacks, the overwhelming attacks the immigrant community received, not just the undocumented folks, every immigrant community received, because at the end of the day, we all noticed that it was really a core of white supremacy that was happening. And so being able to go ahead and see that and open to that discussion of diversity and equity, I think is the first strong step to see continued change of what we want to see move forward with the Biden administration. Of course, I think most of us have concerns as to how much the president has currently done so far. Of course, only 100 days in the administration is still very early on. And so we're hoping to be able to see more, but as of right now, this is the strongest steps that I've seen this president take. And of course, I also hope to see more of that diversity as well as expertise come in on what and how to really move forward to finally bridge that gap and acknowledge the pain and the hurt that has happened with the immigrant community in the past from previous administrations, not just the Trump administration.
Thank you, John, and to the Centreville Immigration Forum. Also been coming here for quite some time, and a huge fan of the work done by the forum. There's not really a whole lot that I want to add to my co-panelists. I echo as a practitioner, and I've practiced immigration law for almost 20 years. I echo it's a system that I've been working in for a long time. Yes, it's broken, and yet part of the dysfunction is also by design. Many of the things that we would call dysfunctional, like for example, the robbing of due process for asylum seekers, taking away a chance for people to be able to tell their stories, or nonsensical laws like the 3- and 10-year bars that basically prevent people from leaving the United States and coming back and quote unquote doing it the right way. Laws like that were put in place quite deliberately, by the anti-immigrant movement. And they're still around, and they're still going to be a part of immigration discourse unless we identify, who they are and relegate them to the sidelines where they belong. But there is a recognition, and I'm going to basically kind of go over the Migration Policy Institute, which is another institute whose work I trust a great deal and rely on in my own practice. Overall, the Migration Policy Institute analysts found that Biden has achieved 12 out of the 26 immigration actions he pledged to take up during his first 100 days. Campaign pledges that have yet to be met include undoing Trump actions on asylum, and that's a huge subset. That's like 5 or 10 things right there. And also eliminating immigrant detention facilities run by private prison contractors. Other areas obviously would need Congress's help to actually pass new legislation. So we're talking about things that he pledged to at least touch, or the things that he promised to do. What has been done? Interior enforcement. That's been extremely impactful. ICE arrests have actually decreased by more than 60% from an average of 6,800 monthly during the last 3 months of the Trump administration to 2,500 in February, which was Biden's first full month in office. It's not where it needs to be. I want to, be clear about that, but it's heading in the right direction. The Muslim ban is gone. Yay! That's something to celebrate. It lifted the ban on issuance, or Biden lifted the ban on issuance of certain immigrant visas. The so-called green card ban that was done in last year, the beginning of the pandemic, that lifted a lot of these other, and so we started to see in our own dockets and our own clients, cases starting to move again at the consulates. TPS for Venezuela, that was huge. 323,000 Venezuelans in the United States and 1,600 nationals of Myanmar, as Myanmar was also designated for TPS. So that was good. Of course, it's not good. Actually, it's horrible that the refugee cap was initially set to be remaining the same at 15,000, which is a historic low. And as far as immigration benefits, we'll talk about this in a minute. But the reversal of the public charge rule from a practitioner standpoint and what actual impact that has, and I'll explain a little bit about it later, but that's huge. The reversal of the expanded public charge rule, massive impact on eligibility and positive impact on aspiring American communities. So, it's still very early on, but it's important to understand how deeply broken or dysfunctional the system that the Biden administration inherited was. I am not an apologist. I am absolutely wanting to hold this administration's feet to the fire. And yes, there are a lot of things that have happened in the last 100 days that concern me, but there's also a lot of cause for hope as well. So I want to try to give a balanced, take a balanced approach to this. And let's give credit where credit is due so that we can focus on the areas that still need work.
Thank you to each and one of you. As we can hear from each panelist, it's not one particular policy that was very impactful. As Hassan mentioned, Monica and Meredith, he just inherited a lot of work that needed to be done, not only during the Trump administration, but as also Monica pointed out, during the Obama administration. So we're talking about 12 years of work that needs to be done. So thank you to each one of you for providing that insight. We will now move on to the next question that's directed to Hassan. On August 14th of 2019, the Trump administration expanded the list of federal assistance programs that, if used by immigrants, could possibly make them a public charge. What has currently President Biden done regarding public charge?
Oh, here we go. So public charge. So public charge has always been, for those who might not understand, crash course. It's been a part of the immigration law since the 1800s, maybe even before, in various forms. And the idea is that people who come here shouldn't be, they should have to show that they're not inadmissible to the United States, that they should be able to come in as long as somebody is willing to vouch for them while they get on their feet, essentially. And the way that was done, so they wouldn't take means-tested public benefits to which they were not entitled. So the way that was done up until the Trump administration was usually on a form, an affidavit of support, a form I-864. And whoever the sponsor was, or if they needed to get a joint sponsor, if the income wasn't high enough, they'd fill out this form, show their tax returns, and as long as their adjusted gross income was higher than 125% of the federal poverty guidelines for that household size, that was all you needed to show. So it was a mathematical, just a calculation. Either the income was high enough or it wasn't. And if it wasn't high enough, then you'd find a joint sponsor, or in certain cases, able to use the foreign nationals or non-citizens' own income, and you got through it. And it was never really a problem. So of course, that which was not broken needed to be fixed by the Trump administration. And so what happened was they decided to say, well, instead of just looking at the income, what we're going to do is to make that just one out of 25 other things that we want to look at. So they started looking at the non-citizens' English-speaking ability, at their tax returns from their home countries, at their properties that they held, at their health insurance history, so many different other things, their family histories and whatnot, all in an attempt to look for a reason to find, to make a finding that this person would be inadmissible to the United States as a public charge. Just to give you an idea of how much, so this was initially brought on at the consulates, and there was a quadruple rate of denial between 2018 and 2017, I believe, public charge denials at consulates around the world. They tried to bring the same thing into the United States, but were blocked through litigation until January of 2020, when the Supreme Court finally sided with the Trump administration and said, yes, if you want to bring this public charge thing into the United States for people filing for green cards and benefits inside the US, you can do so. So February 24th, 2020, that was the date that the new public charge rule was going to go into effect. And it scared people so much. I remember that week at our office, we filed 8 cases in 72 hours. Why? Because everyone was so afraid of what it would mean, because we had no idea, what this new regulation was going to look like. I tried my best to warn. I'd gone to the Hill in September of 2019 and met with 17 members of Congress with a draft copy of the Form 944, which was the form that was going to take all this information in, and where people would have to prove their English-speaking ability and all this stuff under the expanded public charge rule. Circulated it amongst members all over Capitol Hill, but eventually it did become the law. It was so burdensome. It was so burdensome and so fearful. We would get calls from expectant mothers who were talking about unemployment that they might have gotten, 15 years before, right? Not knowing, whether any of this would have had any effect on their citizenship, for example. And that 400 or 500 page rule was so obscure. I never got a chance to read the whole thing, and quite frankly, I'm glad that it's in the dustbin of history where it belongs. But the reason why it was deliberately obscure, it was really hard to understand what benefits would fall under and would make people ineligible, and what could be considered and what not. Did it apply to work visas? Did it apply to citizenship, et cetera, et cetera? And honestly, I think the chaos was part of what was by design. Anyway, it had been blocked several times and then reinstated and blocked, and it was sort of a seesaw throughout 2020. So the easiest thing the Biden administration could have done is to just take the appeal, because Trump had filed an appeal to the Supreme Court about this, is to just drop that appeal, and that's exactly what happened. So basically, it went back to the status quo, which was several federal court decisions that had it blocked, and so now it's no longer. And now the agency has come in and formally revoked it. So the Form I-944 is no more. It's hard to overstate how impactful this actually was on the immigrant community, because there was such a fear of people thinking back to every single time they might have gotten something from a government source somewhere, and just the fear that they could lose their entire lives in the United States as a result of taking that benefit, even if they were entitled to take that. So, you know, good riddance, and kudos to the Biden administration for taking it and getting rid of it as quickly as possible, especially since I had a number of requests for evidence with deadlines with the 944s that I was able to not have to respond to as a result of this. So that's the public charge rule, and it's gone.
Thank you, Hassan. As we all heard from Hassan, this was a very detrimental initiative that 45 tried to do. Luckily, with the new administration, as we all heard, it's no longer a thing. I do see some questions coming in. So what we'll do at the end of this segment, any questions that you may have, we will respond there. So we will go through each of these questions, and before we head on to the next section of this discussion, we will do a Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to send them through the chat. We will get to them once we wrap up this segment. Thank you. And the next question is to Monica. On October 4th, 2019, the Trump administration blocked visas for immigrants who could not show they could afford health insurance. What has been done? Has the Biden administration done anything to overturn this or work against this?
So as we know, we've seen now the administration come and take in and really overturn a lot of the notions that the Trump administration had. And I'm sorry to say, with this particular visa standing, I'm not completely sure. Actually, I would ask Hassan. Do you know if they've overturned that, Hassan? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, I believe they have most of these regulations, but I'll have to check on this particular one as well.
Yeah,
to keep track of every little one.
As of right now, what we're seeing a mixed bag. A few things have kind of gone through, but a lot of the Trump era policies have continued to remain. And it's something that we've gone back and forth with the administration about, not just particularly on those visas, but also on what particular countries have been impacted more than others. We've continued to see a number of kind of biases, particularly when we're looking at certain African countries, Haiti particularly, on how those deportations are continuing to grow. So with each line item during the Biden administration, we're looking at it closely. We've asked many asks of the administration, but with this particular issue, it's going to take some time to turn that over. So not just this, right, but also a lot of TPS issues that are coming up that are particularly tethered to Virginia, because we have the 5th largest TPS community in the country, but also the B1 visas that Virginia has the #1 population in the country. All of these visa line items are currently and have been made of the ask with the Biden administration. That change is yet to happen within this first 100 days. We are still hopeful that the Biden administration will move forward on more actions within the next 100 days. But as of right now, the vast majority of those asks have yet to be turned. Although it's quite possibly, Hassan has it right, that one has gone through. But it's still a trying time to be able to go ahead and move forward with the Biden administration on these asks, as they're still hoping that they'll see more action from Congress. And that's where a lot of the separation tends to come in from the advocates and the administration. And so that is what we have been pushing forward for the administration to do more. So in this particular change, yes, that one has possibly gone through. However, the vast majority of our asks with specific visas, TPS, as well as other immigration statuses have yet to be moved forward on.
Thank you, Monica. And the next question is directed to Meredith regarding TPS. We all can remember well, previous administration ended TPS for over 300,000 of immigrants who live in this country for several years. And because of these cancellations, what this brought out is that several TPSianos or TPS holders filed lawsuits against Homeland Security. What's going on currently, and has President Biden designated TPS status to any new countries? I know there's been talks about Venezuela that the previous administration did not want to give them designation. So what's happening with all this?
So I'm going to take a stab at this, but Hassan, feel free to jump in if I miss something or misstate something, because I'm not as familiar with these, but Hassan mentioned that there are a large number of court cases being filed. I seem to find about 10 major federal ones that have to do around the cancellation of the temporary protected status for those 300,000 folks that you were talking about. And to start, like, the basis of these cases were kind of rooted in the racial discrimination that we saw in the cancellation of this, the fact that it violates several federal protection acts, and it also takes away constitutional rights to those temporary protected status beneficiaries. So just to dive a little bit more into that, they're saying that the main arguments against this cancellation has been that the termination of TPS has violated the Fifth Amendment, the Due Process Clause, which kind of prevents, it does prevent the government from arbitrarily taking away your personal liberty, so life, liberty, and property. There are also several that kind of class action lawsuits that involve the children of these folks who their status has been revoked, saying that they are being faced with an inhumane choice of either staying in the country where they are a citizen, where they have lived their entire life, or leaving and being with their parents so they can stay here and be alone, or they can go. And they have joined a bunch of class action lawsuits saying that that is a violation of their civil liberties. In terms of additional TPS status for countries since the Biden administration has come in, Hassan mentioned that Myanmar and Venezuela have been extended. I believe I saw Venezuela had been extended, and that reaches about 300,000 eligible recipients. And I know that there are 12 current countries that are eligible for this protective status, but that only 6 of them are in full effect due to some of these court cases that are working their way through. And I think in terms of what's next on the horizon for countries that could be looking towards getting this status is Guatemala, because they were devastated by hurricanes last year. So I know that there are lots of folks there who are in need of that temporary protective status. So that's kind of the basis for these court cases. I don't think that there has been a final conclusion on any of these. I don't think we have full resolution on this issue yet, but I know that there are many cases working their way through from several different angles, and that since Trump has left office and we've gotten the Biden administration, we've got a few new countries with protective status, and as well as looking forward to extending that to some more countries moving forward.
Thank you, Meredith. The next question is directed to Monica. 2018, previous administration had a zero tolerance policy that would persecute all those that cross a border, including individuals that were accompanied by minors. Fast forward to 2021, President Biden established a task force to reunify families that were separated under this atrocious policy that the previous administration established. How many families has the task force reunited? And what are the additional goals that this task force is hoping to accomplish in the years to come?
So I think first and foremost, we need to acknowledge just the dehumanization of this policy and how that really impacted not just those experiencing it, but those who really had to acknowledge what this administration had come to, and just the stripping of the values that we have to really hold family sacred and understand what those relationships and how much damage this did to these people, to these children, and the after effects of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so even now, right, we're still kind of reeling and trying to understand how many were impacted, how many children were affected, and really still seeing the effects long after the fact that we still have hundreds of children who have yet to be reunited with their families. And how those policies have absolutely shown what the Trump administration was completely about in regards to the undocumented population. And so during that time, I know that we had several initiatives where both Senator Kaine and Warner had gone out and actually met with families and also met with children and kind of see what the whole situation was like, and understanding that, you know, children being put in these facilities was really not the most beneficial thing to do, especially when the vast majority of them had some sort of family member they could be placed with here in the United States. And so as we're looking at those numbers and continuing to see that, I think we will continue kind of to see the unraveling as we kind of continue of just how bad the problem was. I think under the Trump administration, they were incredibly strategic at really just putting things under the carpet and really just manipulating the situation to not allow the public to have the transparency it needed to really know how many families were affected, how many children were affected, and really just the overwhelming toll that happened. Even just, you know, having reporters being able to visit these facilities was incredibly difficult. Members of Congress being able to do so, it was something that was a number of obstacles are put up. I think now we have had the commitment from the Biden administration to go ahead and move forward to try to go ahead and find the families of these children. But even then, you know, hundreds of children are still left without being able to go ahead and find a verifiable parent or someone that the government does not consider the appropriate individual to have custody of that child, whether it's a distant relative rather than an immediate relative. So there's still a lot of complexities to this and things that we need to go ahead and kind of continue to invest in. I know that, you know, a number of organizations, particularly Catholic Charities here in the local area, has done a great deal of work in the front lines of how this has really impacted those minors, not just at the border, but here in the Commonwealth and their families, and the traumas that get brought up, and also what those placements look like after the fact if children are unable to go ahead and find their families, and how this really has played a role primarily on how they move forward in life. And so unfortunately, I do not have those exact numbers for you from the Trump administration. I know a lot of numbers have been reported over the past, but we've seen those numbers shift. And to be honest with you, I think we're going to go ahead and continue to see that story develop as we move forward. But we also have to be cognizant that there's still hundreds of children, and hundreds of families that are missing those children. And so this is something that we have to continue working with, and what that is going to look like in the long term, since it's already been quite a bit of time that they've been separated from their families.
Thank you, Monica, for sharing. This is a lot of work to be done. It's ensuring so we can reunite families. The next question is directed to Hassan. President Biden signed an executive order called Creating a Comprehensive Regional Framework to Address the Causes of Immigration, to manage migration throughout North and Central America, and to provide safe and orderly process of asylum seekers at the United States border. This is a mouthful. So this executive order was signed to tackle the asylum policies that the Trump administration established during his tenure. Will this executive order be enough to remove the obstacles that his administration did?
Well, it's really hard to say. You know, the text of the order, I'm familiar with it. It's a good start, but it's extremely ambitious. I mean, we're talking about, well, first of all, let's remember, I mean, the filing of asylum is a right that's guaranteed not only under international law, but in the United States Code. Title 8 United States Code Section 1158, and it doesn't matter how one enters the United States, as everyone here probably knows. You can come at a port of entry or outside of a port of entry unlawfully. You still have the right to apply for asylum. But obviously it makes sense to have a safe and orderly way for people to do that. The situation at the border, the last time I was at the border in 2018 in Tijuana, Mexico, and there was separation, going on at the time. And I remember speaking with one woman who, she had, I was doing a consultation at a local church in Tijuana, and she had brought her documents over, and I noticed that there was a misprint or a misspelling of one of her children's names. And her number, I don't know if you all know about the little secret book, the metering that was going on in flagrant violation of the law, where there were just numbers that were given out to people, and every morning they would, let in however many, sometimes 5, sometimes 10, sometimes more people to apply for asylum, and everybody else just had to sit around and wait until their number was called. And so they, might have to wait weeks or months or whatever. And her number was apparently about to come. And I had to tell her, I said, this misspelling of your child's name, they may decide that your birth certificate or showing that this is actually your child is invalid and actually separate you from your son, all because of a misprint on the. Now, luckily, she was able to get in touch with her, or she told me that she would be able to get in touch with her family, back home. She was from, I forget where she was from now, but that shows you the level of how far down this system had gone and how much they had thought. I've heard before that, Trump came in with a sledgehammer and just broke the whole system. And there are certain things that, yes, he took a sledgehammer to. But as Monica was saying, there are certain things that he took a scalpel to, right? And that's the real danger here. The system has not just been broken, but it's been repurposed and reprogrammed. Someone knew where all the buttons to press were. Someone knew where all the levers to pull were to transform the system from even then it wasn't like it was a great system beforehand, to turn it into essentially a deportation machine, a due process free, vacuum at our southern border. And I think that this order, takes a comprehensive approach, which I think is good from a messaging and from a sort of a vision or conceptual standpoint of addressing root causes of migration. The asylum eligibility, Section C of this order, that says that within 180 days, conduct a comprehensive examination of current rules, regulations, decisions, internal guidelines governing the adjudication of asylum claims. Because another thing that happened in the previous administration was the goalposts moved, right? It's all fine to sit here and talk about what happened at the border. That's bad enough. But what about the system that these people were going to be funneled into? And one of the things that Attorney General Sessions and Attorney General Barr did was to certify pro-immigrant decisions of the Board of Immigration Appeals to themselves for the sole purpose of gutting them, right? Matter of AB, matter of Castro-Tum, all of these cases were put in to rob lawyers like me and asylum seekers of the ability to rely on these case law for the benefit of our clients. So you take away not only the system, take away the ability for people to tell their story, and take away the ability for lawyers to advocate for them. That's what we're dealing with here. So yes, it's good that there's a section, recognizing that needs to happen, but only time will tell. And I think it's a responsibility of each of us to make sure that whatever the text is in this order, that the administration follows through with it.
The next question is directed to Meredith. During his presidency, Trump lowered the ceiling for refugee admission, something that Hassan mentioned earlier, and every year it reached a historic low, and the lowest it reached was around 18,000. He also placed limitations on referrals that came from the United Nations Commission for Refugees. What has been done currently to overturn and increase the admission?
To be perfectly honest with you, there has not been any movement on this issue. And I know Biden has made a ton of progress in a very short amount of time on a lot of issues, but I feel like immigration is one of the issues that has kind of fallen through the cracks, been put on the back burner, however you want to put it. It hasn't gotten the visibility and the attention that it deserves, given given the impact that it's having on people's day-to-day lives, and just the number of people who are being kept where they are in nations that are not safe and who should be granted this refugee status. So I know that moving forward, we've heard initially that he wanted to have 125,000 refugees per year allowed to come into the country. After we got past February, when they started trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of it all, his administration said that that was an aspirational goal and that they needed to be more realistic about the numbers. So there's been a lot of back and forth. At one point, there was talk of not changing it at all until the end of the fiscal year. But thankfully, there's a lot of back push from the community and from activists. But I think that the Biden administration has said by May 15th that they will be making an announcement to raise the number of refugees. And I think that the current projection is around 62,000 or 63,000 who will be permitted to come in. So I've done a fair amount of research on this, and I'm still not totally clear where the number will end. But it's my hope, and it seems to be the plan, that we'll be getting some movement on this really important issue within the next 2 weeks or so.
Thank you, Meredith, and thank you to each and one of you for addressing these questions, these important questions that we all just heard. There was a lot of work that President Biden has done in these almost 100 days, and still more work to do. So now, before we move into the next portion of immigration legislation, we will take questions from the audience. I do see questions coming in. The first one is from Alice Foltz. I am accompanying a person who is still afraid to apply for expanded health insurance because of the public charge fear. This person is on a pathway for citizenship and says it's not worth taking the chance. Is there any way to assure people about this?
It's been difficult for me as well, Alice. Getting people, because no matter what, I can tell people this is what the law says, and this doesn't apply to you, and no, you're going to be fine. And at the end of the day, what I try and tell people is, look, no matter what, you're going to have obstacles in your path. My job as your lawyer, as your advocate, is to drive your case forward. If they knock you down the first time, really victory in this game really just means getting up one more time than you're knocked down, right? But people have different risk tolerances. It's hard enough to convince people on an individual level when you have like their undivided attention and they're like, speaking to you as a client, for example, to a lawyer. Getting that message out en masse it's very difficult, because you don't know what this individual circumstances are. It may well be that you tell people that they're going to do something or go ahead and file for something, and they wind up getting a request for evidence asking about this, and all of a sudden they're freaking out, as, oh my God, why are they asking me about this? Even though they have a defense, even though they might have a way to gain that benefit, despite the fact that they might have taken a public benefit. So it's a tough one, and honestly, if there's anything that I would tell people now, it's that, look, whatever Trump had put out is gone now. So things went back to the way they used to be. And I can also relate that immigration officers themselves, they didn't like asking these questions at the local office either. They didn't like asking questions about the 944 and asking all these other questions. They're thrilled to not have to do that anymore. So there's that.
Thank you, Hassan. The next question is, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name ahead of time, is from Jen Scavengi. What impact did the threat of the public charge draft have on the census?
I guess that one's meant for me as well. Well, the census numbers just coming out and showing the slowest growth of population since the Great Depression, I think it is, for this last decade. I'm not aware of any empirical or study on what effect the public charge doctrine would have had, or expanded public charge doctrine would have had on the census per se. But you know, certainly that's an area that I think needs to be investigated, needs to be looked at, because I think we are running the risk of a drastic undercount. I will say that this whole game of using the census offensively against aspiring American communities is not something that came for the first time for the 2020 census. The anti-immigrant movements, Federation on American Immigration Reform and Center for Immigration Studies, they've been doing this pretty regularly since 1980. They got laughed out of court, out of the District of Columbia back in 1980, trying to pursue or add the citizenship question on the census. So this goes back, you know, about 40, 50 years. But every decade since then, they've been pushing and pushing and pushing, and you see how close they came this year. And at the end of the day, whether the citizenship question was put on the census or not, the shadow war on immigrant communities may have been a lot more successful. So.
And I will add on to Hassan's sentiments, but we're starting to see how that is rolling out, right? Yeah. It was only about a week ago that the census went ahead and released the first numbers on how, you know, that has changed. But we know that the administration did an all-out assault on immigrant communities, not just those who are directly impacted by public charge, but also how that has impacted mixed status families.
Right.
I know when we work closely with community members in regards to the suit that went before the Supreme Court against the Trump administration regarding the citizenship question, we had community members tell us, hey, I may have status, but my mom doesn't, and I'm just too terrified to fill out this government form. And so all of those complexities, we're now starting to see how that's turning out, and it's really going to be impacting how we're looking at redistricting in our state, and not just at the federal level, but also at local and state level, and how that really is intertwined in dispariting immigrant communities from having fair representation at all three of those levels. And so you have to be able to go ahead and look at those numbers, and we're gonna have to go ahead and start looking at other avenues on how we can go ahead and see, did the census really do a good job at assessing at what those community members look like, particularly if they're not correlating with school population or other aspects where we can actually go ahead and take a fairly good count of what the community looks like in representation. And so we're starting to go ahead and see that roll out. But you know, as Hassan said, this is something that has gone on for decades, and actually goes even further back than that with the Roosevelt administration, who strategically used the census to create the Japanese internment camps. And we still have community members here in the Commonwealth who unfortunately had to live through that horrific moment in our history. So, you know, this is something that has actively happened and keeps our communities absolutely continuously suspicious of the government, and that's unfortunate when we're trying to go ahead and change policies and move forward and create an equitable, safe space for everyone. So this is something we have to be vigilant, and I will roll on to that and say, now that we've had those census numbers counted, now we have to be also vigilant and participating regarding the redistricting aspects of what's happening in our state.
Thank you. We will now move on to the next portion of our discussion, where we'll be discussing immigration legislation. The past 4 years, it was very rough for all of us in this room, and even for our friends and loved ones. And now, with the new administration, there is a glimmer of hope. There is promises. So we'll be jumping into new immigration legislation. What is going on currently here at the United States at the federal level? And for the first question, this is being directed to Monica. In March 2021, the Dream and Promise Act was passed in the House. What is included in this bill?
Sure. So first and foremost, we were really excited to see this bill initially introduced. However, we've seen kind of the evolution of this bill, which does not resemble the very first bill that was introduced initially regarding, that was just the DREAM Act. So now the Dream and Promise Act was set forward, and then it was moved forward specifically for DACA recipients as well as TPS recipients to be able to go ahead and find a pathway forward to citizenship. And so what we have gone ahead and seen that, you know, they have to be over 18, they had to have been present here by January 1st of 2021, but also now, in addition to kind of those regular old requirements, a deviation that we've seen is now the adding of criminal bars. And this is new. Because now this narrows the scope of the individuals who are going to be able to apply if this legislation actually gets passed through in the Senate side. And so what has really come up, and we've had multiple discussions on this, is the addition of very vague language that includes crimes of moral turpitude, which has a long history in immigration laws on being able to go ahead and pick up biases that happen in communities of color. And so this is something that we're now closely watching on how it continues to evolve. It's very exciting that this bill that was put forward by Congresswoman Velasquez and Congresswoman Clark, you know, move forward and actually pass through the House and see that move forward. But as we continue to go ahead and see that, we have to keep in mind on how do we go ahead and push through policies that are as broad as possible. And so as we continue to see this bill now move over to the Senate side, this is now going to be the center of the conversation with this bill. What do those crimes of moral turpitude mean? What is the more specific, and how do we go ahead and figure out to make this as broad as possible to make sure that as many community members as possible can actually apply for some sort of status moving forward on this? And whether that might be adding amendments to this particular bill or actually having to move forward in completely separate legislation and really tackle the inequities that we see in our criminal justice system. Because the fact of it is, there's a bias when it comes to people of color in our criminal justice system, and we have to acknowledge that. And so now, although we're excited that this is moving forward, we are now really concerned with these aspects of criminal bars and what that means for folks. And, you know, it just completely makes them ineligible to move forward and keeps them in that undocumented status, which of course we know is incredibly problematic, not just for themselves, but for their families as well. So this is something that is incredibly tethered to all of those stakes, and how we see that really impacted on undocumented communities of color. And so moving forward on this, we will hopefully see some action happen in the Senate. But what I also want to remind people is that in order for anything to pass in the Senate, we're going to need 10 Republicans in addition to the 50 Democrats. So just because there's a 50-50 split with the vice president being the president of the Senate does not mean that there's an automatic majority and that the Democrats can pass any piece of legislation they want. And so what we will likely see is this broadening of conversations when it comes to pieces like this in regards to criminal bars and possibly anything else. And I think we really saw that last night in the president's speech when he said, you know, you want to pass immigration reform, hey, there's money for the border wall in that bill that I sent forward in the 2021 Citizenship Act. And the same sentiment also carries over to the Dream and Promise Act. So that's something that we really have to look at and make sure that we're, you know, focused on and try to make it as broad as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. The next question is directed to Hassan. The Farm Workforce Modernization Act was also passed in March in the House. What are the major components in this bill?
Yeah, we're hoping that this one will move forward as well. But the Farm Worker Modernization Act of 2021, the main thing is that it provides certified agricultural worker, or CAW status, to any non-citizen who can show that they performed at least 1,035 hours of agricultural labor during a 2-year period, which is currently set to March 8th, 2021. and showing that they were out of status or inadmissible or deportable or had deferred DED or TPS or something else, and remains then in the United States. So there's, criminal bars, that are also a part of the Farm Worker Modernization Act as well. But if a non-citizen is eligible for CAW status, it'll be valid for 5.5 years, can be extended, and that non-citizen spouse and children, if they're undocumented, can get derivative CAW status. So the rest of the bill modernizes and changes the H-2A program, which is a seasonal agricultural worker visa program. It's an existing program. It makes some changes as to how that program is administered and the recruitment process that employers have to go to try to find U.S. workers to fill those jobs, and makes it a little bit easier for agricultural workers here on seasonal visas on the H-2As to apply for portability, to be able to move to different employers. There's also, the last part of it is a housing preservation and revitalization program, providing financing assistance to rural rental housing and off-farm labor housing. I think that's an important thing to be able to put into a bill like this as well, authorizing the DOA, the Department of Agriculture, to provide assistance to like ensuring loans or grants for farm worker housing. It reflects an understanding of the situation on the farms, in the fields, right? We want to do what we can to empower these communities. This is a huge chunk, a good chunk of the undocumented population, and so a recognition of not only what they need right now, but also a pathway towards citizenship is sorely needed. So aside from that, I'll just echo everything else that Monica said with regard to the political realities of passing these types of reforms, getting 10 Senate Republicans in the Senate and 50 Democrats, or hopefully 50. Hopefully 50. But it's a marathon, y'all. So let's keep our best feet forward.
Thank you, Hassan. The next question is addressed to Monica. Last week, a little over a week ago, President Biden met with the members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and he stated that he would support immigration reforms, possibly through reconciliation. What is reconciliation? Is this achievable? And what are the other options to achieve a pathway to citizenship for underdocumented and undocumented immigrants?
Sure. So when the Congressional Hispanic Caucus had initially sent 2 letters to the Biden administration earlier this year, really affirming that we need a pathway to citizenship as soon as possible. And that is really the focus of why they're pushing for some sort of amendment to be attached via budget reconciliation moving forward. So once a year, the Senate has to go ahead and take a vote on the budget. And that budget vote only requires 51 members to go ahead and approve it, so it can go ahead and get signed by the president and then be enacted into law. And we saw this most recently with the COVID bill. And so that COVID bill only took 51 votes, which included the vice president, and then immediately went over to the president's desk. He signed it, and they sent out $1,400 in cash relief to the vast majority of Americans. And so now what we're trying to go ahead and do not just the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, but a number of institutions, a number of elected officials, including the governor of Virginia, who just last week went ahead and sent a letter to President Biden saying, you need to include a pathway to citizenship for essential workers in the next budget plan, specifically because we've been down this road before. And the reality of it is this, it is highly unlikely we will see 10 Republicans finally decide to say, okay, we are supportive of some sort of pathway to citizenship for individuals who on average have been waiting 18 years. So we know this is something that has gone back and forth in the past. We saw this during the Obama administration, and the Republicans very strategically ran out the time. In Virginia, we learned this lesson when we went forward in the General Assembly and fought for driving access as well as in-state tuition for Dreamers. We ended up passing these legislations without a single Republican vote. At the end of the day, our people have waited long enough and they need relief this year, not next year. And this is something that we find incredibly concerning, that the president has decided to go ahead and put immigration on the back burner. He has continued to say that they're hoping to be able to go ahead and find some bipartisan solution. But the reality of it is, if decades have gone by and we have not found that bipartisan solution, last night he clearly said it's been over 30 years since something substantial has been done. So therefore, this is the quickest relief that the experts we've been working with have said that we can actually get something done this year and sign this year, enacted into law this year. And that's very important. And why is Virginia so disproportionately impacted? Let me tell you why. We have 2 senators. We're the only state in the United States of America that has both sitting senators sitting on the Senate Budget Committee. Neither Senator Kaine or Senator Warner has decided to go ahead and take a stance on this, which is surprising to me because our governor has taken a stance on this and taken the initiative to send a letter to President Biden. And so since we have both senators sitting on the Senate Budget Committee, not only do they have a voice, they have a vote, and they have a leadership stake on this, not just for the Commonwealth of Virginia, that would have 140,000 essential workers directly impacted, but over 5 million people across the country. So right now, that's what we're really pushing for, both senators to finally get on board and be supportive of this initiative that, Vasir has collectively endorsed, which includes all 39 member organizations, as well as a slew of other entities that are part of our federal committee. And so this is our biggest push to date, because we know that as of right now, these are the negotiations that are happening regarding the next proposal for infrastructure that we're seeing that'll be rolling out in the next month or so. And so right now, time is incredibly critical for this decision to be made, as we know that likely that final project, that final deal will be made in early June, maybe earlier than that. This is a rolling timeline. And so being able to go ahead and not just get the administration on board, but also our senators on board is crucial, not just for the Commonwealth, but for Virginia. And so that is what's happening right now in regards to budget reconciliation. It is our best bet to moving something forward, specifically because it has already been done. I know there have been some arguments regarding the Byrd Rule, but there is precedence to actually having something passed in regards to immigration status and giving people a pathway in this method. And so we are hopeful that everyone can go ahead and take that initiative on calling the senators and asking them to be supportive of adding a pathway to citizenship in the next budget package for essential workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. The next question is directed to Meredith. On March 15th, 2021, the Citizenship for Essential Worker Act was introduced. Where are we with this bill right now? And how does this bill define essential workers? Several states have different definitions of essential workers. So what does this bill include, and how do they define essential workers?
Yeah, so this bill, I'm gonna really quickly talk about the whole bill itself, and then I'll kind of break down like what is considered an essential worker and where the bill stands. This bill was introduced, and it includes an 8-year path to citizenship for anybody categorized as an essential worker who is also undocumented. And the bill has the goal of giving all of those hardworking folks who had gone to work every day during the pandemic, give them the chance to earn citizenship and don't have to worry every day about being deported. We've been through 4 years of absolutely damaging immigration policies, especially towards undocumented workers. And I'm hoping that this bill is going to be a first step towards repairing that damage that has been done. This bill has been introduced, and it was introduced in February. And like I said, it creates a pathway to citizenship for undocumented workers, but it also boosts the number of visas available. I think that the number of employment-based visas will increase from about 140,000 to 170,000. It also aims to reduce the processing time. A lot of the backup that we're seeing is due to the length of time it takes to process one case. So kind of making sure that we're expediting the cases or the applications for citizenship that we're currently getting, as well as focusing on those undocumented essential workers. And it also aims to increase the diversity of people that we're letting in, put an end to the Trump administration's policy of discriminating on immigrants allowed in based on race or country of origin, especially against Muslim immigrants and refugees. Like Monica said, it's going to be really difficult to get anything through right now because it would take 10 Republican votes, and immigration is always such a tough issue. So unless we really start doing some of the hard work and can get some folks on the other side of the aisle to kind of listen to reason, the easiest way to do this is going to be through the reconciliation process that she was talking about. If we don't do that, then it's going to take a lot of people, not just us here in Virginia, but across the nation, making sure that they're calling their elected officials and letting them know that this is important. To go into what is defined as an essential worker, I said before that there are 5.2 undocumented immigrants that are currently designated as essential employees, and that accounts for 3 out of every 4 undocumented worker in the United States. So these are people who are going to work every single day, putting their lives and their family safety at risk so that an American citizen doesn't have to, is basically what it breaks down to. They're far more likely to contract COVID. They're less likely to seek medical help for some of the reasons that have already been discussed here today. So they've really had to carry the brunt of this pandemic. And I think that the consensus is that they need to be rewarded with a path to citizenship. This act would also cover folks who had lost employment due to COVID-19, either contracting it or leaving their place of work due to unsafe conditions. And it would also extend to the undocumented relatives of workers who have died from COVID-19 contracted on the job. And like I said before, some of the bill actually says that there's about 15, 16 different ones, but a lot of the ones we don't think about are home healthcare workers, hotel, hospitality, restaurant workers. We may not think of them as on the forefront in terms of the medical sense, but they've been keeping not only our society moving, but they have been keeping our economy moving throughout all of this. And I think that beyond the stuff listed in the actual bill itself, an essential worker is any other worker deemed essential by the Department of Homeland Security or a state or local government. So there may be some variation about who is included at the state level, but this has just been introduced, and I think that there are likely going to be some changes coming to it. So that is where the bill stands right now, and kind of who is covered underneath it. I think that our next step is going to be following it through the House. And I don't think we'll have as much issue in the House as we will in the Senate when it comes to that. So keeping an eye on where it stands and kind of how you can either call and let your voice be heard, not here in Virginia, not just here in Virginia, but everywhere else. And just staying in tune and making sure to stay in touch with your legislators is going to be the best way to get these through, and thank those workers who have shown up every day and contributed so much.
Thank you, Meredith. The next question is directed to Hassan. We currently have heard that there's bills to provide a pathway to citizenship to essential workers. We've also heard regarding TPS. what bill is there currently at the House or at the Senate that would provide a pathway for permanent residency for TPS holders? If there is any, where does it currently stand?
Well, well, my understanding, that's exactly what the Dream and Promise Act was. Dream was for the Dreamer side, and the Promise was for TPS holders. And so that was HR 6, which passed on March 18th, 2021, to allow holders of TPS status or its kind of related cousin, Deferred Enforcement of Departure, or DED, which is not the exact same thing as TPS. There's a legal distinction, but effectively people with DED can apply for a work permit, and they're protected from removal as well for a certain period of time. It's only been used twice, most recently for Liberians, and well, before for Liberians, and now most recently for Venezuelans. It was actually, DED was given to Venezuela in the last hours of the Trump presidency. But essentially, that's what we're talking about. I know that there's been a question about whether these piecemeal, do we take essential workers and then farm workers and dreamers and TPS holders and DED holders, as opposed to going for the wholesale, immigration reform. I think the consensus is, and this is certainly my opinion, speaking only as an attorney and an advocate, that the piecemeal ways are the way to go. There are too many. I love the way the Citizenship Act of 2021 reads. It's comprehensive in scope, in breadth, and in vision, and it hits a lot of the right points. But you put all your eggs in one basket, and it's going to be that much easier to attack and stall. A decentralized approach, while requiring a lot more patience and coordination amongst immigrant rights groups, is not just a better way. I'm going to go ahead and say that it's the only way that it's going to happen. So.
Thank you, Hassan. So this wraps up our portion. Challenges when dealing with federal lobbying, and how does it differ from lobbying at the state or even at the local level?
I can just go ahead and hop in because I haven't done any federal lobbying, so I can kind of give my perspective on the difference that you might see at the state level. Since Virginia is not a full-time legislature, you get maybe a month and a half to 3 months to work through these really complex issues, to get out information to legislators, to their staff, to people who might be willing to show up for lobby days. So I think that the year-round nature of the federal lobbying scene is both a blessing and a curse. You don't have as much time to stretch things out and kick the can down the road in Virginia because it's such a short session. But also, if you don't get it through, then it's dead. You have to come back, in another 10 months and if you're going to try again. So I think that is the main difference I see between kind of trying to push something through at the state level and the longer window you have at the federal level.
I can jump in. I mean, I having done advocacy, and the pedantic lawyer in me is going to use the word advocacy as opposed to lobbying, because lobbying has certain requirements attached to it that I don't want to get into. So advocacy, at least in Richmond versus DC, my experience has been, look, after representing clients for almost 20 years, it really is the state house and the state laws that most affect daily life, driver's licenses, in-state tuition, being able to access benefits, education for children, choice of college, things like that, rent relief, housing relief. These are all, very, very local, some cases hyper local state issues. and it's extremely meaningful and extremely impactful. And I feel like you can make more change. I mean, just looking at what's happened since the blue wave or blue shift in 2018 here in Virginia, look at what's happened, or look at what's happening. You know, decriminalization of marijuana. We had driving privilege cards. You know, there's a U visa registry now. I mean, it's something that I just never thought would have seen. Special immigrant juvenile status. That was another bill introduced by Senator Scott Centreville that now brings Virginia's special immigrant juvenile status laws in line with the federal government, in line with the federal law. So whereas before, a child who crossed the border and wanted to apply for special immigrant juvenile status, a form of relief with a very high approval rating, a very high grant rate, would have to get their predicate court order in state court before they turned 18. And you know, I remember doing this and actually filing emergency motions to try to get a court or a judge to hear these cases before, because usually, but you get a 17-year-old who crossed the border, you got a very limited time, whereas the federal law allows that to happen until the age of 21. So these are you know, small things that they seem small, right, and they seem nitty gritty, but they have massive impact. On the federal side, it's more of a slow and sustained you know, like river of attack. You have to keep moving, and you have to keep applying pressure, and you have to be really patient, because the gears that you're trying to move are that much bigger and that much more impactful. So you know, requires a great deal, and that's why I find a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff I wind up talking to on the local level, because that's where you can have more impact. And a lot of the stuff that I'm taking or keeping for the Hill for Washington, D.C. is more conceptual, vision oriented, saying, hey, look, you know, the frame that we're having this conversation in, the table, the other you know, groups at this table, they don't need to be here because they're wrecking the discourse for everybody else. I think there needs to be that sort of hard reset, and that's why most of my, I guess, federal advocacy is focused on the anti-immigrant organizations, FAIR, CIS Numbers USA, and the so-called Tantan network that has created that harmful discourse that has stalled meaningful immigration reform for the last 40 years.
I would just chime in and say, I personally don't think there's an enormous difference between advocacy at the local, state, or federal level. It's still about you being able to go ahead and tell those elected officials or their staff why you think they should do what they should do and how this particularly impacts you or your community. And either way, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level, there still needs to be a response to that constituency. And I think what we've really seen is a shift in the last number of years in the Commonwealth of Virginia and how that's really been impactful, how that's really weighed in, and also those demographic changes, particularly when it comes to Northern Virginia, and also how we've seen a lot of that shift in regards to the redistricting, restructuring that we saw through a number of lawsuits on, you know, the discrimination that happened there. And so how we've seen that now play out and the differences in that representation, I think is crucial, but also making sure that you are letting your voice be heard. And of course, members of Congress and the senators have far more constituents than your local delegate or your state senator, but it's the same thing. Ultimately, you know, they need to be able to hear from you and do it often. Have your whole family do it, have all your friends and family do it, because ultimately at the end of the day, this has been the core of how we go ahead and make those shifts. But not just that, right? Also understanding who are those most powerful advocates who can tell that story, who can go ahead and push or touch that elected official in a way to really be able to go ahead and be the best representative on behalf of our community. So I would go ahead and say that, and that just, you know, keep the pressure up, just like Hassan said.
Thank you, everyone. The next question is directed to Meredith. With social media playing a key role in encouraging civic engagement, what advice would you give to individuals, nonprofits, and faith leaders who would like to take their social media influence to the next level?
And I think that I'll talk separately about what nonprofits and maybe religious organizations versus an individual who kind of wants to expand. I'd say for groups like nonprofits and religious groups that the best way to kind of grow your circle and your audience online is to just stay constantly involved. A lot of what we see online is regulated by algorithms from the different platforms. And one thing that is consistent across all of the different platforms is the more regularly you post, the more regularly or the more likely folks are to see your content in their timelines or on their feeds. So making sure you post regularly. And then if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of it, videos tend to get a lot more views than just a plain text post or sharing a news article with some text as opposed to just sharing a news article itself. If you're a group that has a budget, doing occasional boosted posts to kind of elevate your group and reach outside the traditional people who are already following you, that's a great way to kind of grow online. And then I think the main thing for groups is to kind of find out who you are, like what your style is. Are you goofy? Or you just want to be facts and like straight down to what's happening? Finding out what's your style and staying authentic to that, because I think that's one of the things that all groups that have a loyal following or a growing following online is they find what works for them and sticks with it. For individuals, I would say that the best thing to do is, I stayed away from Twitter for a very long time just because of how divisive it can be and how ugly it can get. But Twitter is hands down the best place to find up to the minute information on what is happening, whether federal, state, local, any level really. If you want to look around in your community or at the issues that you're really passionate about and find the community activists and organizers who are on the ground doing the work and follow them. They'll most likely be talking about upcoming events, other folks who are doing hard work, other groups that are doing the work on the ground, as opposed to just the people who speak the loudest. You want to follow the people who are actually doing the hard work. And then just staying up to date on big things coming up, you know, whether it be the General Assembly session here in Virginia, or like finding a bill that you're trying to follow, and just follow it, especially on Twitter if you're looking for the latest information. And that's how I would say that individuals could best stay involved and kind of be aware of what's happening around the issues that they're really passionate about is Twitter. Maybe just avoid the comment sections.
Thank you, everyone. This does wrap up our discussion on various topics. And now we would like to open up to the Q&A.
I see there's a comment here from Alice about personal stories and how they are really effective. I know that I said videos do better in the algorithm, but anything that also has that kind of personal appeal, not just to your social media audience, but to legislators you're speaking to, really trying to nail down on that underlying issue that you can kind of connect with and get them to understand outside of just this being a piece of legislation. Like, these are people's lives. This is like impacting them on a very real level, kind of making sure they understand all the real world impacts of what they're doing up there is a great way to connect on social media and connect to your legislators.
This is Alice, and I wonder what Republican legislators we should begin to appeal to on the Senate side. Obviously, we need to draw in some Republican legislators, so who are the ones we need to start working on?
So I think first and foremost, right, we've seen some of the moderates who have kind of said they're somewhat pro-immigrant, but they haven't completely gone all the way over. I think being able to go ahead and get them as actively spokesmen, such as Mitt Romney, I think would be incredibly helpful, since Utah has such a large immigrant community. And then, you know, there's still a couple of members that we're still looking at. I wouldn't, discount South Carolina's Lindsey Graham. In the past, he has gone ahead and been willing to go ahead and put his name forward in regards to bipartisan legislation, such as the Bridge Act. And so we're going to see some of those names come up, I think, first and foremost. I think if we can especially get those two Republican senators at the forefront of speaking up, hopefully we'll be able to go ahead and see some more move towards the moderate side. But I would also add that I would add some moderate Democrats along to that list, particularly Senator Manchin from West Virginia.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you to the panelists. We will now enter our closing remarks. Each panelist will have 3 minutes to give their closing remarks.
So I'll go ahead and go first, if that's okay. I cannot overemphasize how critical every single Virginian's voice is right now, this very minute, to calling Senator Kane, Senator Warner, and telling them you want them to include a pathway to for citizenship for essential workers on the next budget package. The administration is calling this infrastructure package, the Infrastructure Act. And so being able to go ahead and do that would have a huge impact, not just on Virginia, but nationally. If we're able to go ahead and have the senators then move up front and do this, then we're going to be able to go ahead and see some of that pressure nationally, and even from us, move over to Senator Manchin, which is right next door. And so we really need them to absolutely step up to the plate and do this. Just for context, we have been asking them since January. And so we've sent multiple letters. We met with the administration. We met with them multiple times. Previously, they had told us that they were really nervous about the bird rule. We cannot let them deter the fact that we need to go ahead and critically have them move over and publicly state they are in support of us that has the 9th largest immigrant community in the United States. For the life of me, I do not understand why the senators have been silent. They would not be the first senators to speak up on this. Just recently, we had New Jersey Senator Menendez, who is carrying the Biden version of the 2021 Citizenship Act on the Senate side, speak forward and say, I think this would be a great idea, who is also part of that CHC club and those members of Congress that met with him. There was also a letter that was signed on to by both Congressman Connolly as well as Congressman Beyer to do so. The senators have been silent. It boggles my mind why they have been silent. We need every single person to call their office and tell them we need them to speak up now. We need them to defend Virginians now because we have very limited time between the finalization of these negotiations of what that next bill would look like. And to have them, that would mean that we would change the tides nationally and we would actually have something in hand for our people this year. I've shared a number of links on the chat, first and foremost, which includes a rally that is happening this Saturday that is co-hosted by a number of VICIR member organizations. I would also say that yesterday during the Biden speech, United We Dream was the first one to really swing and make sure that they had a big civil disobedience event specifically calling out for a pathway to citizenship for essential workers. If you need talking points to call the senators, go to the VICIR website. I put the links on the chat, specifically the fact sheet that was created by the Commonwealth Institute for Fiscal Analysis. You can go point by point and tell them why you think this is a need. This is a need. It should be at the forefront of the list of things that they're looking at. So please call Senator Kane and Senator Warner and tell them that they need to defend the immigrant community. Thank you.
As we're walking away from this, I want to make sure that we are, again, I feel like I'm a one-note show here, but are remembering the laborers who have risked their safety and the safety of their families to keep this economy moving. And I found this really great statistic that said that not only are immigrants a big part of our community, but they are a huge part of our economic prosperity, and that every year at the federal level that undocumented immigrants contribute about $80 million in taxes. So when we're talking about them, we're talking about laborers who are contributing to the economy, who are paying their taxes and who are living in constant fear. despite the hard work and the selfless work that they have done through the past year. So making sure that we're watching those bills that are offering those folks a path to citizenship, and offering them some protections from deportation, making sure that we don't let this important issue get pushed to the back burner any longer, and making sure that now that we've addressed some of the other issues, that we don't let up on this issue and kind of drill down and make sure that we are not forgetting a huge segment of our country and our population.
Well, yeah, thank you once again to the Centreville Immigration Forum for this opportunity. I alluded before to advocacy kind of going in cycles, right? I mean, there's things that you kind of have to do constantly, you know, if you're doing this work, you know, pushing a more inclusive narrative, understanding, you know, where a divisive narrative comes from. And it's always important to remember where the fires are coming from, where the flamethrower is, so that you can you know, take them out, so that you actually have room to build a more inclusive and humane policy. But fires still need to be put out, and sometimes you gotta just drop what you're doing and go and actually, you know, take care of the fire. And so what Monica was saying about the pathway to citizenship for essential workers as part of a budget reconciliation, this is a fire that needs to be dealt with. This is a red hot emergency that needs to be taken care of and needs to be addressed right now. I don't really know how to stress it any other way. If there's one takeaway, if you're only joining the call now and you just hear this one thing, then I think it would be a success. It's not going to happen any other way. It's just not going to happen. Those of us that have been, and I'm a relative newbie to this work. I spent most of my time filling out forms and going to court, but understanding the lay of the land at this point, this is the only way that this is going to happen, to give people an actual pathway and create some momentum that's going to give people real legislative relief. That's not just an executive order away from getting reversed by the next administration. Okay, this is the way that it can actually happen. At this point, Virginia is uniquely, you know, situated to do that, and it just needs to happen. So I'll give you a reminder of why immigration reform, the comprehensive reform, failed back in 2007 under then President Bush. It's because the switchboards lit up on the Hill, and the group that was most directly responsible for the bipartisan reform that otherwise had a decent chance at passing, you know, under the situation back then, was Numbers USA, the largest grassroots organization founded by John Tanton, a white nationalist, in the mid-1990s. And they lit up the switchboards to a point where they had never seen that level of people calling in opposing immigration reform. And what happened? It failed, right? Do not underestimate the power of your call. Do not underestimate the power of the people that you can mobilize to call and make our senators, who are in they're in the driver's seat at this point. They can make this happen. So that's my pitch for that. I do want to take a minute and give a legal update, if I can, to a case that was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court earlier today, Ms. Chavez versus Garland, because of the potential impact. If you have worked with people who have been ordered removed, may still be here in the United States with orders of removal because they didn't qualify for cancellation of removal, right? In which you have to show that you were present in the United States for 10 years prior to being placed into deportation proceedings. Today's decision by the US Supreme Court says that the vast majority of those notices to appear that place people in removal proceedings are invalid for stopping the 10-year accrual of those 10 years. What does that mean? It means that a lot of people who are now in the US who were ordered removed, weren't able to apply for cancellation of removal, may now get that chance. So my Facebook feed is abuzz with people talking about motions to reopen and whatnot. This is big news. And the fact that it came from Justice Gorsuch is, I don't know, icing on the cake. It's a huge decision. We are extremely excited about it. I wanted to let you all know about it. You know, I'm happy to send out more information, but the case is Ms. Chavez versus Garland. It promises to provide a second chance to a lot of people who might not have had it otherwise. So I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. And thank you once again for inviting me. And thanks to my co-panelists as well. Always good to see you.
Thank you to each and one of you, Hassan, Monica, and Meredith, in taking the time and sharing your knowledge and expertise on this vast topic of immigration. It's just not one bucket, right? Like, we know everything is right now is affecting everyone. And now we're working together to ensure that we do work for immigration reform. So I do want to thank each and one of you, and thank you for everyone that attended here virtually. If you are interested in receiving email information on advocacy, immigration updates, or would like to follow the organizations that were represented today by each of these panelists, please feel free to do so. Meredith Ackerman is For Our Future. Monica Saramiento is with Virginia Coalition of Immigrant Rights, VACIR. And then also Hassan, if you know anyone, for those here listening, if you know anyone that's looking for an immigration lawyer or looking for someone, please feel free to reach out to Hassan and his legal team. I know they'll be willing to help. Once again, thank you for participating in this event. And as Monica mentioned, on May 1st, this Saturday, there will be a huge rally for immigration reform. This is a national event where we'll be going to the White House to give a reminder to President Biden on the importance to achieve immigration reform. So if you feel comfortable in going out and attending with several organizations, we will be meeting at Black Lives Matter Plaza at 11 a.m. If you cannot attend or cannot join, please spread out the word. Please make phone calls to your senators. I see that someone mentioned in the comment, how often can I call my senator? Bombard them, call them every day, do emails. As Ariel mentioned, they do take tallies. So please, if you cannot join, you always have phones, emails, social media, their Twitter handler, anything that you can do, help so we can achieve this immigration reform. And once again, thank you, and we will stay in touch.